Good afternoon. I'm Spot On Weather meteorologist Matthew Euler, and we're going to take a look at the Spot On Weather Hurricane Florence update, the 11th of September 2018, the 4 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time update on Florence. So let's get right to it. Right now, this is the latest National Hurricane Center official track. We'll start with that. If you look down the left-hand side, we're still expecting Florence to come in as a major Category 3 hurricane. What does that mean? That means the wind speeds will be 111 to 130 miles per hour approximately, greater than 111. Generally, the trend is for the hurricane to make a northwestern path or on a northwestern course towards either the Wilmington, North Carolina area or just to the north of that area. Okay. Generally, again, we're expecting a major Category 3 hurricane to make landfall on Friday morning, Friday the 14th of September. Current winds 130 miles per hour, has higher gusts. Also moving west-northwest at 17 miles per hour. On the right-hand side, I'm showing you the latest GO16 infrared image of Florence. You can see that clear area in the center, that is the eye. And then you see the darker, actually the maroon colors as well as the darker grays and blacks on the southeast side of the eye. That is all the eye wall wrapping around the eye. This is quite a powerful storm. It's definitely one that will definitely have a major impact on the southeast U.S. coast up into the mid-Atlantic states. Here are the tropical storm force probabilities and timing. Showing on the lower left the diagram of tropical storm force wind speed probabilities. Southeast Virginia is sitting in the 60 to 70% chance. Could be as high as 70 to 80% with just a slight shift in this storm. Additionally, on the right-hand side, I'm showing an image of the earliest reasonable arrival time of tropical storm force winds, showing the winds to really ramp up here into the eastern North Carolina area, including the Outer Banks into southeast Virginia on Thursday morning. The current watches and advisories that have been issued, this has just recently changed while I was in the process of making this update, but there's now a storm surge warning and hurricane warning that's in effect for the North Carolina coastal areas. And we do expect a tropical storm watch to be issued for Hampton Roads, and in fact it has just been issued. I just literally saw the message before recording this latest update. So there is a tropical storm watch in effect now for the Hampton Roads cities of southeast Virginia. Now let's take a look at the model data. We see a lot of this on the TV weather, on the news, whatever you decide to watch, but the models are constantly shown. Let's take a look at three of the major global models. All right, we're going to take a look at the Canadian model first, then I'll go into the GFS, and then I'll go into the European model. The Canadian model is the worst case scenario. The images here show the time frame Thursday overnight on the left and then Friday morning on the right. It shows Florence basically hanging off the Outer Banks and drifting, basically coming ashore at the Outer Banks area on the right-hand side on Friday morning, the 14th of September. Now, this would be the worst case scenario for the Outer Banks as well as southeast Virginia, because the storm would pummel the Outer Banks with that significant storm surge, damaging winds, and very heavy rainfall, which could lead to a lot of flooding. So this would be the worst case scenario of the Canadian model. You can see how Florence comes in. The worst thing out of all of everything that I'm going to talk about is the fact it's going to just basically stall and not move very quickly at all. Here is the GFS model. Notice GFS model, these two images, one on the left, one on the right, shows Florence coming in right around Wilmington, North Carolina, overnight landfall on Thursday, the 13th of September, into the very wee morning hours of Friday, the 14th of September. So this is the GFS model, which has now come in greater alignment with the European model, because now I'm going to show you the European model, and there you see the European, very similar landfall location now to the GFS model. So we only have one outlier as far as global models go, and that would be the Canadian model. Now, the Canadian model doesn't do so good with the hurricane tracks overall. It has a tendency to do poorer than the GFS and the European model. So here's the European model, again showing Florence coming in around the Wilmington or maybe just slightly north of the Wilmington, North Carolina area on the, basically on the, around midday actually on Friday the 14th of September. All right, I want to really emphasize two major threats that really are resulting in being big killers for hurricanes. One of those is a storm surge. And this diagram shows what a storm surge is. If you look at the left-hand side of the diagram, you have extremely low barometric pressure at the center of hurricanes. That's the area where you have generally the eye, the center. So what happens is low pressure near the eye will pull the water up higher off the ocean surface. It's like drinking out of a soda straw. If you put a straw into a glass of soda or a glass of anything, as soon as you go ahead and try to drink from the straw, it's going to cause that liquid to rise up from the surface through the straw. Similar thing happens with a hurricane. The extremely low barometric pressure is like a huge atmospheric straw, and it really sucks up the ocean level, the ocean surface, the water from the ocean, into a higher mound. It piles it up into a higher mound of water. What happens is, as the storm gets closer to the coast, the beach, the bottom of that higher pile of water, the storm surge itself, starts feeling out the bottom of the beach or the landmass as it comes into land, and the top part of the storm surge just spills over the land. The waves push the water inland faster than it can drain off. And you can never underestimate the power of water. It is such a dense substance. You get a huge push of water as far as the storm surge coming inland, over land, just getting pushed by those really unbelievably strong hurricane force winds. And it literally can take houses off their foundations. It can do so much damage. It can level anything in sight. So please, there's been an evacuation order for the Zone A areas of southeast Virginia, down closer to the ocean front. There's been evacuation orders in effect for the Outer Banks of North Carolina as well for Florence. So storm surge is one of those things you just don't want to take a chance with. You're looking at very high tides, high tide cycles, and then you have this wall of water on top of those higher tide cycles, which can make for very bad consequences for those that decide to ride out a storm, not really fully understanding the power of storm surge and the power of water in general. This is the other major killer in tropical systems. It's the flash flooding. This is the forecast from the Weather Prediction Center for the amount of rainfall projected with Florence. Now, I did see a more up-to-date graphic just recently. It's really going to be dependent on the track where the heaviest rain falls, as well as where the feeder bands, those rain bands set up as the circulation comes in off the ocean on the north side of Florence. You can see the main track is in the purple color areas here, and that's where you could have up to 20 inches of rainfall in association with Florence. The maroon colors are generally 10 to 15 inches, while the orange colors are between 6 and 10 inches. So just keep that in mind. This is going to be a prolonged flooding event in association with Florence. I explained the other day in the video that the main strong upper level winds are well to the north at the present time. So this thing is just going to keep sitting and spinning for days on end. All right, so here are the final thoughts of the video tonight, okay? We still may see a slight adjustment to Florence's track for landfall, but we're not expecting anything significantly drastic or different than what we see in today's numerical models. We are starting to lock onto a landfalling solution as I speak, with the GFS model now coming more in alignment with the European model. Generally looking at landfall as a Category 3 storm, most likely near or just north of Wilmington, North Carolina, between midnight and noon on Friday, the 14th of September, 2018. Now, as far as Hampton Roads impact, Southeast Virginia, We're expecting those impacts to begin Thursday, lasting through Saturday. We're expecting tidal flooding at high tide cycles. It could be as high as 6 to 7 feet above normal. The tidal flooding, the level of the water. So some very flood-prone areas are typical in the area. Could really easily be inundated during those tidal cycles, those high tide cycles. We're expecting flooding rainfall with 6 to 12 inches likely. And again, this is dependent on the feeder bands and where they set up, where those rain bands set up with Florence. Tropical storm force winds, gusts to 50 miles per hour inland, 60 miles per hour along the immediate coast are expected. And that is why the National Hurricane Center has now issued a tropical storm watch for southeast Virginia up through Cape Charles Light. Maximum winds are going to be really dependent on the distance the tropical storm force and hurricane force winds extend outward from the center. One thing I wanted to mention with hurricanes in general is once they hit land, they lose their energy source. Their energy source being the water, the very warm tropical waters. There are a couple threats, though, when a hurricane comes in and makes landfall. The first threat being, as a tropical system weakens, the wind field expands. And as the wind field expands, that tends to result in a much broader area of destructive winds. So just keep that in mind. As Florence comes in, we expect very rapid weakening with Florence after it loses its source of energy, the water, as it moves inland. However, that energy is going to be spread out over a much larger area, and that's typically what happens with hurricanes that weaken. The other threat I want to really emphasize is the tornado threat as winds are drastically slowed between the ocean and the land. So over the ocean, the winds blow relatively quickly because there's no buildings, there's no trees, there's nothing really to get in the way of the wind over the water. But once the hurricane reaches land, you've got buildings, trees, you've got all kinds of structures that kind of block the wind. And as that wind blows over the land, it tends to get slowed down by the force of friction. So you have slowing winds near the ground, but higher up you still have very fast winds that are not impacted. 3,000 to 5,000 feet above the ground, you might have 50 mile per hour, 70 mile per hour winds, but at the surface, your winds are getting slowed drastically as that wind blows across the ground due to friction, interaction with buildings and trees, like I mentioned. So just keep that in mind. You get great vertical wind shear, and what can happen is with the feeder bands, you get these little isolated thunderstorm cells embedded within the heavier rain squalls, and you could get rotating updrafts because of the wind shear. Basically, the wind speed is varying different directions, different levels in the atmosphere above the ground. So that can cause a twisting motion, raise an updraft from a thunderstorm cell, and cause a isolated tornado. So these things can happen really quick too, these tornado warnings, when you have landfalling tropical systems. One other thing I wanted to mention with the precipitation with feeder bands with tropical systems, the precip tends to start really quick and end really fast. So there's a good possibility that we could see some dry periods in between all the heavier squalls. So hopefully that will help alleviate our flooding situation in the Hampton Roads areas. It just really depends on where these feeder bands set up as far as the rainfall amounts. There's going to be an area that's going to get really hit hard. That may be further inland. Right now it's still up in the air as far as where the final track of Florence goes when it gets inland. Some of the models want to bend it more to the west and southwest. Others want to move it, basically west-northwest. So it's really dependent on where that finally sets up. But overall, hopefully everybody's got their hurricane preparedness plans. They got their kits. Hopefully everybody's ready to just kind of shelter and be ready to go as Florence approaches the North Carolina coast. Again, the wind radius, how far out those winds expand as Florence weakens, will be key as to maximum wind gusts we can expect in southeast Virginia with the storm. Again, tidal flooding, 6 to 7 feet is possible above normal. And again, just some very strong winds, some very heavy rain, and isolated tornadoes. So stay safe. This is Spot On Weather. This is the latest update on Florence. Again, everybody stay safe, take care, and that wraps up today's video at Spot On Weather. Remember, if we're not spot on, we're not doing it right. Have a great evening and stay safe, everybody.